A handful of years ago, my wife and our children took a trip cross-country in a car from coast to coast. We affectionately called ourselves the Griswolds as we stopped at every major mile marker across the country. If you watch that movie, you'll see we did almost all the same things they did. Luckily, we were not forced to face the follies that they had to endure. We got to Yellowstone Park and we did something called glamping, which is glamorous camping. That's about as fancy as I'm ever gonna get and is about as earthy and rustic as I'm ever gonna get. And then we took a 6-hour horseback deep tour of Yellowstone, which was amazing. We're riding on horseback and we're seeing bears, and we're seeing moose, and we're seeing elk, and to see God's earth the way it was made in such a natural and pristine manner was fantastic. And our guide was incredibly knowledgeable. And our guide told us something that has stuck with me ever since. Now, when we were growing up in my era, and I'm sure this will resonate for some of you, one of the spokespeople of our era was Smokey the Bear, who warned us all never to cause forest fires because they're so dangerous. And they are. People die, they endanger homes, they take down trees. And we were always extra protective if camping, and they were told to be protective, to never start a forest fire. But what our guide told us as we were going through Yellowstone on horseback was that ironically, one of the best things for Yellowstone Park has been forest fires. One of the best things. I didn't understand it. I thought it was a joke. I thought he was going to make a punchline. I'm waiting for it. And then he explained that every tree, regardless of its type, has a seed. Whether that seed comes from a pine cone or an acorn or some other small seed that we can't see that goes into the ground. And many of those seeds never have the possibility of regenerating unless they reach such a high temperature that bursts the shell off of that seed and then allows it to get planted into the new cultured earth. So the greatest irony is that when a forest fire comes through and takes out 25 acres, let's say, of forestry, that the heat is so intense that through that devastation, it gives life to something that otherwise could never be born. It's antithetical to what we were taught. Now, obviously, I'm not encouraging any of you to go out and go light your forests on fire. But this idea that a forest fire actually has within it the literal kernels to give a new life is so against the grain of what we've learned. It's so ironic in nature. It's so different than how we have been trained that it's almost hard to still digest. Now, I've been thinking about that teaching this past week on the heels of the holiday of Purim, because the catchword, the phrase of the holiday of Purim is nahafochu, which means turn it around, or literally turn it upside down. The idea on the holiday of Purim is we're supposed to become so inebriated with joy, with happiness, that we cannot tell the difference between Mordechai, the good guy, and Haman, the bad guy. We are supposed to realize the irony that takes place in the Megillah that is a foreshadowing for the rest of humanity. So in the Megillah, there's a bad guy named Haman who wants to kill all of the Jews. This is a familiar narrative. And he builds a large gallows where all the Jews will hang from in the public square. And for those of you who haven't read the story, the irony is that Haman and his 10 sons end up hanging from those gallows in the 9th chapter of 10 in the book of Esther. So the gallows that was built to hang the Jews was actually the gallows that Haman and his 10 sons died from to eradicate their evil plan. Here's another irony that's just like that. Just like that. In Auschwitz I, there were 3 Auschwitz camps. Auschwitz I, Auschwitz II, known as Birkenau, and Auschwitz III, known as Monowitz. Auschwitz I, for those of you who've been there, those are the red brick buildings. In Auschwitz I, there was a single gallows put near the Commandant Rudolf Hirsch's house. And he would choose a prisoner daily to hang. The majority of the prisoners he hung were not Jewish, because most of the people in Auschwitz I weren't Jewish. They were Catholic, they were Polish, they were Hungarian, they were political prisoners. And he put them there to hang them as a sign of worry and concern for everyone else there, as a sign to show them what would happen. It was right in front of his house. And it happened every day. They would be hung in the morning if they stole something, if they were out of line, out of count, and they would hang there all day to remind everyone to follow the rules. When the war ended, Rudolf Hirsch was liberated. Let me rephrase that. When the Russian army came and liberated Auschwitz, they decided to find the commandant, which they did, and Hirsch was hung from that very same gallows in front of the village where he lived as the commandant of Auschwitz. Just like Haman. Now here's one more of those crazy ironies for you. In 1935, Adolf Hitler, the Nazi party, part of the Third Reich, had decided to make a set of laws and rules over what is the ultimate in hereditary lineage, genealogy, what makes a pure person, an Aryan. And the laws that they made were named after the place in which they were established. They were called the Nuremberg Laws. And in 1935, who married a Jew and polluted their family, and how many connective tissue pieces were connected from one to the other of who was a Jew, all happened, and those laws were established in Nuremberg. That then led all the way to 1938 of Kristallnacht, and then 1939, the invasion of Poland in World War II and the Holocaust. And in 1946, half a year after the war had ended, there was a tribunal put together where those who were found responsible of war crimes and crimes against humanity were put to death or serious punishment. And where did that happen? In Nuremberg. You see, there is this strange, ironic, cyclical nature for those students of history. For those who look at things and realize how upside down and backwards world can be. How we are supposed to become so intoxicated with happiness that we forget who the good guy is, whether it's Mordechai or Haman. Or that the gallows that were meant for the Jews is actually the gallows that Haman hung on. Or Rudolf Hirsch, if you fast forward in time. That the idea that we were told to be most protective of forest fires, is really the generative idea of a notion of rebirth. Now I want to take that to the pictures that we all see today that we are facing in our society. And I want to share just a few of the snapshots in my mind's eye that I have seen over the last 7 days. And I'll start with the most recent. The first is a group of Polish men who were repairing old train lines and train rails with sledgehammers and large nails, putting them back in order so that the trains could run from the Ukraine to Poland. Now, all I have to say to any Jewish person is train and Poland, and you all know where your minds go. And we all know that in 1940 and 41, and especially in 42, all the way through 45, if you as a Jew, or you as a gypsy, or you as a black person were given a ticket to go from whatever place in Europe you lived to Poland, it was a death sentence. Literally. You were going to Treblinka. You were going to Majdanek. You were going to Birkenau. You were going to Bergen-Belsen. You were going to Belzec. You were going to Chelmno. And you would be one of the 6 million. And today, in the Ukraine, which was a collaborative partner in many cases, paid off the books by Germans to do the worst atrocities to the Jews. Today in the Ukraine, if you have a ticket to get to Poland and you can get on the train, it is a renewal of life. It's your chance to be free. It's your chance for hope again and to begin again Even though you might be separated from your family, you know that you are not in the same level of harm's way, at least not for today. On Wednesday night, we had close to 500 people in our ballroom celebrating Purim. At 7 a.m. on Thursday morning, our ballroom transformed into a staging center for a mission that we're about to leave on tomorrow to go to the Poland and the Ukrainian border and to work with the refugees that are there and the Polish citizens and employees and the Joint Distribution Committee and the JCC in Krakow, who are working feverishly to absorb close to 3 million refugees in a 4-week period. For those of you who don't know, that's close to 10% of the Polish population, 3 million refugees. About 32 million people live in Poland. 10%. Imagine we had a 10% growth in America in 4 weeks, what that would do to our supply chains, what that would do to our demand, what that would do to housing, what that would do to all of the systems in our infrastructure, not only economic. And I was overwhelmed, first of all, with the largesse and generosity of our community. I had expected we'd have a nice response. Nothing I could have ever dreamt of. We gathered more than 20,000 diapers in 3 days. 20,000 diapers. We gathered about 2,000 pounds of powdered baby formula. We gathered 12 duffels filled with socks, and then 5 more duffels came in. Camp duffels, you know how big these are. And as I'm watching in that room, I had these strange, eerie feelings similar to that fire that could burn at Yellowstone but could create life, and the idea of fixing a railroad so that cars could go to life in Poland as opposed to what it was just 75 or 80 years ago. You see, this will be my 17th trip to Poland tomorrow. 17 times that I've been there. It will also be the only time that I've gone to Poland and will not be going to a concentration camp. And each time I go to the concentration camp, there are some things that always catch my eye. One of them are the suitcases that the Jewish people brought that were filled with their personal items, memorabilia, keepsakes, heirlooms, that were then looted and left with their name on it. And here we were in our ballroom, just a couple, dozen feet away from where we sit right now, and 400 pieces of luggage were donated so that people could put things into them, not take them out of them. What a bracha. What a blessing. In 1995, I took one of my first trips ever to Majdanek. The scariest thing about Majdanek, which is just outside of Lublin, is that the border of Majdanek has houses all around it that predated the war. And the second thing that's scary about Majdanek is that in 24 hours, it could be up and operational as a camp. It was basically liberated exactly as it was found, and nothing happened to it. And you can go into one of the storerooms known as Canada, that's what they called them, not related to the country. And they had a collection in a whole storeroom about the size of, just without going to the extension here, of this room that we're in. It's very large, and probably 15, 20-foot ceilings. They had a collection in one room of just prosthetics, a collection in another room of just eyeglasses, a collection in another room of toothpaste, toothbrush, hairbrushes, all that were looted from the Jewish people. But the one that I remember that's very hard to describe is the Canada that was filled with shoes. Men's shoes, women's shoes, children's shoes, boys and girls, and baby shoes. Because over 60 years, leather starts to rot and smell, and it gains mildew. And I can't get that smell out of my nose of what that room in Canada smelled like, seeing all those different kinds of shoes piled together that used to be connected to Jewish feet of all sizes and genders. And as I'm thinking about that, 2 crates came in yesterday of brand new sneakers for kids, Nikes and Adidas, that someone had donated, 200 pairs of shoes. And here we were, bringing 200 pairs of shoes to put on Ukrainian kids in Poland, when 70 years ago they took them off. Here we were collecting toothpaste and toothbrush and hairbrushes in a synagogue that is thriving to give to people of all faiths and all backgrounds. There's no checking of DNA or history or asking for their authenticity in our religion. We're giving them candy as they cross the border, not asking for paperwork. It is the epitome of the words nafochu. We have turned it upside down. Like Haman and Mordechai, like fixing the rail cars so that the trains can come in, like the gallows, whether it was Hearst and Auschwitz or Haman, who eventually hung from them himself. We have turned it upside down. What bothers me about all of this is that there is a place and a people that are profusely hurting and bleeding right now in a country called Ukraine. We all have some historical connection to that region because the majority of us are Ashkenazic Jews, and through that area of both what is Lithuania and those areas of Belarus and Moldova and Poland and Germany and Russia, that's where all of our ancestors came from. So we feel that connective tissue. But not so many of us are hyper-connected today to those in Ukraine. But they are hurting, and we know it. They are bleeding profusely, and we know it. And what's the irony that's painful for me? That it takes their pain and their bleeding to cauterize the fracture that exists here in America. For the first time in, I think, 5 or 6 years, I don't feel so divided as an American. The few people rooting for Putin are seen as marginal, fringe, weird, and strange. But whether you're Republican, Democrat, or independent, white or black, from the South states or the North states, a red state or blue state, we're all in this together. The people who have supported our efforts have come from Temple Emanu-El, they come from the JCC, they come from the local church. There was a guy who drove here on Thursday. He says, "My name is Jose. I read about you in the newspaper. I live in Newark, about 45 minutes away, but when I read about this, I knew I needed to be here. So I went to the grocery store, I loaded my car with diapers and baby wipes, and I came here. I had every intention of dropping it off and leaving, but seeing what all of you were doing, I stayed and worked here for 3.5 hours. That's unity. That's beauty. That is cohesion. That is what makes my heart hum and feel embraced. But why does it take a profuse bleed somewhere else to cauterize our community and bring us together here? I wish I had a solution to that sense of irony. I'll close with the words of one of the greatest inspirational people I've ever been blessed to meet, and I met him twice, and he was everything you would imagine him to be, and only a certain generation in this room will know who I'm talking about when I say his name. One of the kindest and nicest gentlemen I've ever been blessed to know, Walter Cronkite. I was blessed to sit next to him on an airplane twice. I don't know how that happened. 2 times, he and I sat next to each other. He had a great line once, brilliant man. He said, "Our world has been so creative, innovative, resourceful, and boundless of energy and money to ideate new ways to protect ourselves and be offensive when it comes to war. Could we imagine if we spent 1/4 of that energy and resources when it came to peace?" That's our next challenge. We know what to do when people are hurting. We know how to hug them and to stop their bleed. But our responsibility is to figure out how we do that without having them to bleed in the first place. To come full circle, our responsibility is not only to put out the forest fires, it's to find ways to prevent them and still find opportunities to regrow those seeds. May we all focus our energies to do just that. May we be strengthened through that effort. And may those who are bleeding feel our love and support. Can you hear it? So may that be God's will. And let us say amen.